All right. Well, having gained all of these Afrikaner viewers after just recording a couple of videos which just basically said that I welcomed Afrikaners to America and sympathized with them and their plight, and it wasn't. I didn't really do that much or say that much, but I was just overwhelmed by the response somehow. For some reason, for me, like for because I have generally not a huge audience. For me, it was like those videos almost went semi-viral, and I think I'd have gained, maybe a couple hundred new what do they call them at YouTube, followers or friends or whatever they're, just I think followers. And they're probably all people who are Afrikaners who just liked my videos, and all I said in my videos was just, welcome Afrikaners, and wish you well, uh, and so forth, and I know what you've been through lately, and you know it's just like I didn't really do that much or say that much, and got, so much, so many well wishes, so many people leaving supportive comments, um, just fulsomely thanking me. It was rather moving, and it makes me uh, think that this is just not something that they're used to getting. These people, they're not used to hearing anyone say positive things about them. So it kind of made me think back on the 2 weeks that I spent in South Africa in December of 2011, and maybe it would be interesting for the new people who have jumped on and become subscribers. That's the word. For my new Afrikaner subscribers, uh, to hear a little bit about what I experienced while I was in South Africa, because I can't I am not an expert. I'm not somebody who, I'm you know I'm not just being modest here. I was intrigued for a while by the Afrikaner nation, and what they represented, and I think part of what drew me to them was just how hated they were, and how they really were scapegoated, not because they were not because they were beyond criticism, and not because, South Africa in the 70s and 80s was a wonderful, it was just a wonderful place that was beyond being criticized in any way, and not a defensive apartheid in any way, but just because things are always a little bit more nuanced, than they're represented. When you hear some people that are just talked about as if they were the ultimate evil that's ever existed. Uh, it's always more complicated than that, and I was interested in this sort of uh, this sort of white tribe, um, which is sort of what the Afrikaners are. They're they're white, and they bring, their European heritage with them, but in a way they've become African in their own way. Uh, it's not it's not, it's represented as white colonialism, but it's really not white colonialism. These are people who, who have real roots in Africa for centuries now, and became a white tribe of Africa in the same way that you could talk about the Zulus, or any other any other tribe that's indigenous to Africa. The Afrikaners were, after you've been in a place for a few centuries, I think you get to be called indigenous. And when you've become when you've transformed in the way that the Dutch settlers did, because yes, the Afrikaners were the ancestors of or the descendants rather of the Dutch. And when the Dutch came with the East India Company, in the 1600s, they were Dutch through and through. But over time, the Afrikaners became their own unique entity, and they developed a culture that is their own. And it's a paradoxical culture in some ways, because it is white, in its origin, and yet it's also, I think it's fair to say that it's rooted in Africa. It's rooted in the temperature, the climate, the culture, the reality of toughing it out, on in sub-Saharan Africa, as the Boer, the farmers, the Boer, Boer, means farmer originally, and then it became the name of what this nation called itself, and how they thought of themselves. And there's a big long history with the Boer, and most of what we know about it is filtered through Anglo sensibilities. So we know about the Boer War, to the extent that we hear about it at all. We don't, growing up in North America, it's sort of an exotic thing. It's not something that we hear about that much. But when we do hear about it, it's through the filter of English language speaking people, English people, and of course, I'm one of them, as as an American, as a polyglot American, even though I'm not, I'm mostly not English in my background. My European background is mostly either Scandinavian or Slavic, or Mediterranean, some combination of those three on my mother's side, my father's side. But growing up in America, in the United States of America, you speak English, and even though the America gained its independence from the Crown of England, that you still learn about things with an Anglo slant. It can't be helped, and it's not that there's anything really wrong with that, because we all take things in through the filter of our culture. It's just as long as we acknowledge that and are able to question certain things about it, and So you learn about the Boer who became the Afrikaners, you learn about them as these kind of uncouth, sort of like the way that white Southerners or rural, whites are often characterized by the elites of America as rednecks. You know, the Afrikaners are represented as uncultured, uncouth, just refuse, uh, and the English who went in and um, when South Africa became a part of the British Empire, they sort of looked down on these people. So the Afrikaners got it from both sides. They had their conflicts with the natives, uh, but at the same and they were and so they had they were in a a challenging situation vis-a-vis uh, other African tribes, because again, it's my assertion that the Afrikaners are a tribe unto themselves, but they also got it from the bona fide white colonialists, who was that is to say the British, the English speaking settlers of South Africa, and it's a very complicated history, and I plead ignorance. I'm nowhere near an expert on any of it, um, but I was just fascinated by the Afrikaners and how they developed their own. Afrikaans is a unique language. It's not Dutch. Um, it has a lot in common with Dutch, but it's a different language. So that's interesting to me, how this these people who settled in what was for them the wilderness of the southernmost part of Africa, the so-called Dark Continent, uh, and uh, and really changed, and really culturally changed, transformed into something new, something that was still related to what they where they came from, but was still its own entity, its own unique um, culture. And that for whatever reason that didn't happen with the United States, with North America generally, but especially with the United States. The people who came here, who were English speaking, there is an American version of English that's certainly its own, uh, you know that is easy, can easily be distinguished. An American speaker from an English speaker. Not only by accent, but by uh, the kinds of expressions that are used. It became, American. The American English is different from British English, which is different from other forms of English, but it's still English. The language that is spoken by Americans, by most Americans. You know, things are nuanced now, especially. Uh, but it's still the language of America. The official language, if you will, is still English. Um, so the American settlers, the people who came from Europe to America, uh, primarily the English speaking ones, who formed the colonies, and then later the which later became the United States, the 13 colonies that became the 13 states. They still spoke English, but for some reason, somehow, this white tribe that went to that settled in southern Africa, that lived off the land, and became farmers and built their own society in southern Africa. They changed to the extent that they developed their own language, and that was something that interested me. And I think I just have an inherent interest in the underdog. If someone or something is just hated by everyone, and it's like fashionable to hate on somebody or some group of people, then I think to myself, there's got to be. I get interested in them, and if there was any group who was like that, especially when I was growing up, in America in the 1980s, the South Africans were constantly vilified, and the the boycott. They're boycotted by the whole world. Nobody. If you went to South Africa, if you were an entertainer and you went to South Africa and played a show, then your name was mud. Like it was very fashion. It became such a fashionable cause that was really out of proportion to what was actually going on, in my opinion, because the problems that existed in the nation of South Africa under apartheid, for as bad as those problems were, and as much as people did legitimately suffer under that system, it was probably the best place in Africa to live. If you were black, it was probably better in the 70s and 80s to be a black South African. Your standard of living was probably your chance for social advancement was probably better, probably more likely to be better than other nations in that continent, and the tyranny that existed under apartheid, or the unfairness of the system. Well, it was real, but it didn't compare to other places that were where other African nations that were ruled over by a tyrant, a warlord, an Idi Amin type of character. Nobody was saying we need to boycott Uganda when Idi Amin was during his reign of terror. So it was out of proportion, and it all came to an end. That they apartheid ended. They let Nelson Mandela out of prison, and he became the first president. It was a dramatic change in the 90s, and then we just didn't hear as much about it. It was like if you did hear about it, if you dared to tune into what was actually going on, you saw this is a country that was really falling apart at the seams, and seems to be continuing to do so. Just this basket case of a country, since the ANC, Mandela's political party took over. But that you weren't supposed to talk about that. It was for obvious reasons. We all know about political correctness. You're just not supposed to draw attention to something like that, and you're not supposed to draw attention to something like to white white people getting slaughtered. You're not supposed to. It's like uh, paying attention to that, seeing. Well, if this were happening to black people, we'd be screaming bloody murder about it, and we should be. But when it's happening to white people, we're not supposed to talk about it. That's not right. That's just inherently not right. Um, and so I became very interested in South Africa, and when I in the late aughts and the early tens, when I was writing for an internet outlet called Alternative Right, um, which was edited by the now notorious Richard Spencer. um, but he, so I've taken my hits for having my affiliations, but whatever, I'll take it, and I'll take it in strides, and I have no regrets, and and no apologies. But it was during that time when I when Richard and I were in touch. When I said I told him my interest in South Africa, and like he was saying we should do. There was he had access to some capital, and I sort of said, it would be interesting. It'd be really interesting for somebody to go over there and like meet some people and do a sort of report, and then take some pictures, and conduct some interviews. Just go on the ground, see, visit this place called Orania, this like mini Afrikaner homeland, uh, um, and just investigate what's happening with the Afrikaner nation, uh, since the new dispensation, since the end of apartheid, and what was supposed to be the beginning of just wonderfulness, and the end of all the strife that existed under apartheid. And you know clearly that was a joke. And so I said, I pitched that to Richard, and I persuaded him, or he was interested, and he eventually said, okay, and here's we'll set you up. Here's so I was able to choose a time to visit, and I got in touch with some people over there. And at the time, it was on Facebook. And sadly, I've fallen out of touch with all those people. And I wish I wish I hadn't. But the only person I remember, and he's not like I knew a lot of people. Like I lived with I lived in this guy's house for a while. Can't remember his name right now. You know, it's because it's been so long. Um, but people were really kind to me. I just sort of put my feelers out, and used whatever connections I had, some of which was through uh, Richard Spencer, but some of them I found on my own, and I was just amazed that people went to bat for me. People offered, they offered to let me stay with them, um, and so forth. So I was able to keep the costs of the trip down, because it was still a fairly low budget sort of endeavor. But I wanted to go over during the month of December, because I wanted to be there for the Day of the Vow. I wanted to see uh, how Afrikaners uh, celebrated the Day of the Vow. And I'll talk about the Day of the Vow and some other things that I experienced next time, in upcoming videos. But I just thought this was sort of my introduction for everybody, for all my new Afrikaner subscribers and anybody else who's interested. So there you go.